Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining from in the world. Welcome to the second part of our two-part webinar series, which aims to unravel the potential of generative AI in pharmacovigilance. In our first webinar, titled Six Use Cases, Four Pitfalls, and Two Considerations for Real-World Application of Generative AI in PV, we showed you live examples of different PV use cases solved using generative AI. We also spoke about some pitfalls to be aware of while working with generative AI and how you can start your journey within your PV organizations. If you are not able to attend the first webinar for some reason and would like to view the recording, we will send it across to you by email. The link to the recording will send it across by email. I encourage you to go through it. We had really great engagement with the audience as well, and encourage you to share it with your colleagues too. So in today's webinar, we will deep dive on trust mechanisms and cost considerations in implementing generative AI in PV. A topic that is top of mind for many of our clients and PV leaders such as yourselves. Like previously, we will not only discuss the topic, but also demo examples that bring the concepts to life. My name is Nikesh, and I'm your host for the webinar today. I head Global Safety and PV at Indegene, and have the pleasure of working with top industry leaders in the PV area across large, mid, and small pharma devices, as well as biotech organizations. Joining me today are my panelists. Let me first start with Jack. Jack is a PV leader from the industry. He is an MD and a board-certified internist. He's worked in the pharmaceutical industry for more than 20 years now, and has been in over the last, 13 years in drug safety with VP positions in organizations like GSK, Roche, and most recently CSL Vifor. Thank you, Jack, so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Nikesh. My pleasure.
Yeah, I also have my esteemed colleague from Indegene, Tarun. Tarun has been at the cutting edge of technology for many years now, a few decades. He's been contextualizing best-of-breed technology to the life sciences domain. He's also a speaker, well sought-after speaker on many panels such as this. And we look forward to getting some nuggets of wisdom from Tarun, you as well. So thank you so much for being on this one.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, super. So, before we begin, I would like to let all of you know that you can use the Q&A box to post questions, and we will be taking all the questions right at the end. Right, so let's dive in now. Jack, let me start this discussion with you. You've been a PV veteran and have seen numerous technologies implemented under your leadership. In your conversations with your peers from other pharma organizations, what is the perception of generative AI specifically for applications in PV and safety?
All right, yeah, thank you very much, Nikesh. No doubt generative AI has the potential of disrupting PV like many other areas actually. And when I look at generative AI in the light of PV, I see a lot of opportunities, and at the same time, there are open questions we need to address. Let me talk a bit about the opportunities first. I think generative AI will, of course, raise the consistency of outputs we are producing, and examples can be the generation of case narratives and aggregate safety reports, just to name two. Therefore, there is this potential of generative AI to strengthen the compliance, which is so important for PV around highly regulated processes. It can also make our work a lot more efficient and help us take out mundane and repetitive work, while then freeing up capacity to focus more on strategic aspects of our work. For example, the generation of solid data and science-driven benefit risk assessment, or spending more time on building solid strategic input into aggregate safety reports and risk management plans. Now, I talked about questions related to generative AI as well, and these potentially relate to the reliability and accuracy of the outputs. So what is the overall quality we're dealing with here? It also covers the validation of the tools and the techniques applied. And then one last big question that I would have is how acceptable is the use and application of generative AI options for the regulators we're dealing with around the world. So bottom line is that trust is key for real world adoption of this hot new topic, both inside but also again outside of our organizations.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Jacques. That was a great perspective, and I think I just like to underline what you said. Trust is key, right? And before I come to you, Tarun, I would like to know the audience's opinion on this topic. So the audience, you would now see a poll flashing on your screen. Please select the appropriate response, and we will come back to this once you've had a chance to vote on this. So, Tarun, let me come to you. You and your team at Indegene have been experimenting with generative AI, and I have heard you speak on trust mechanisms before. What are your reactions to this topic?
Well, I completely agree with what Jacques was saying, and for us, establishing trust, that's the number one priority, right? So today, when we implement systems and we talk to our customers and partners, the biggest issue is always, how do I trust the system? How do I know that I'm getting valid output from it? How do I trust that the processes that we built around it are compliant? And so there's a couple of different tactics, and in the space that we operate in, one that's extremely sensitive to risk, as well as data privacy concerns, there are some approaches that organizations take, such as using the generative AI as a way to augment the processes rather than replace. And so we ourselves are a subscriber to that philosophy that you still have human expertise that are responsible and accountable and can actually add that level of trust into the system. However, their workflow and their day-to-day tasks are augmented, accelerated, made more efficient through the use of generative AI. So the question then becomes, well, how does that materialize? How do you build a process, a human-in-the-loop workflow that has the advantages of generative AI, but if you bring in human in the loop, then are you then just canceling out those advantages of the technology by you're bringing in human expertise anyway? Then what's the point? So what we learned is there are mechanisms in how you interface, that human user interface between man and machine for interacting with the output of generative AI and making decisions. So one tactic, and those of you who may have used like Microsoft Bing, powered by their AI models, and now we're seeing this in other places. When you do a search query powered by generative AI, references may be cited within there. And so similarly here, when we have generative AI making decisions or doing content extraction, for example, then being able to trace and have a rationale or an explanation. Why did the AI system pick that? So that when the human reviewer looks at it, they can quickly see, okay, this is the rationale that the AI used to make that decision or that extraction, and then they can verify whether that is aligned with what the actual task is. And that little shift in workflow and process yields significant benefits. Rather than having to go through hundreds and hundreds of lines of text or search through a ream of information, they can quickly zoom in to see, does the rationale and explanation of the generative AI, does that hold true? And that's the kind of time savings we look at. And actually, we can show a quick example of what that looks like in the literature search as part of this. So maybe, I don't know if you can actually bring up the screen share.
So what we are right now showing is an example of a literature article. So within pharmacovigilance, we know that we routinely monitor literature for adverse event reports. And that is the use case that we are today looking. As you could see here on the screen, we have the literature article coming in here. And what we are doing is we're going to process this particular article via the generative AI model. So on the screen here, this is a platform that is built by Indegene. We use this in order to carry out our experiments using generative AI. On the left-hand side, the articles being taken in and provided as an input to the generative AI model. And then the model right now is going to run, and we are soon going to see the output here on the right-hand side. So we have the output that is generated, but what is interesting here to note is we are extracting multiple different fields that are relevant for ICSR processing, right? This is the section D within the ICSR part. And if you notice closely here, for this particular field, which is D.2.2, which is the age of the patient, you could see that the machine or the model is able to throw out a relevant phrase for the value that it's captured, which is 13-year-old patient, right? On the left-hand side, you can also see here in the article, right? The same has been identified by the model, and the value of that has been shown here on the right-hand side in the output itself. You could also see here that it's been mentioned that the patient was diagnosed with diabetes mellitus, and this itself is going to be captured in the right-hand side output in just a moment. So multiple fields have been extracted. Part of it in D also is the medical history of the patient itself. So as you can see here, the value is type 1 diabetes mellitus. And then there is a rationale and relevant phrases that has been associated with it, right? The same has been captured from the document, which is on the left-hand side.
Thank you, Aditya. Tarun, we have you back.
Yeah, apologies. Right when I was speaking, Zoom decided to crash on me there. I guess when the poll window was closing. So apologies for that. But I heard Aditya walk through this example, and this is a powerful example. By the way, more and more of the large language models. So if you look at what Google is doing with GCP, we've seen this with Titan from AWS. They're actually building into the models this traceability and lineage explanation, because that is a concern not only in our space but industry wide. Everyone has this trust issue. So we're actually seeing these models are actually fine-tuned and trained to deliver these kinds of references is the most common one, right? If you do a search on any of these tools, getting back a URL or a link to where did this answer come from is certainly there. But I think this is something that's going to be standard fare with interacting with any of these large language models, this ability to trace and explain the answer.
Thank you so much, Tarun and Aditya. It's really important to have that explanation, as I could see, right? Because one of the things we've heard from our clients as well is areas where AI models often fail is distinguishing between medical history and adverse event, right? And having something that actually traces back to the article gives the confidence. So it's really important, I guess, to have that. Before we move forward, let me come to the audience poll we ran, and I think audience seems to be in a lot of agreement with you, Jack. I think obviously what is key is trust in the output and quality assurance, but regulatory and compliance is also up there, and about almost 40% of the audience feels that all three of them are quite important factors. So that's something that's really important to look at. And recently, the European Commission came up with the AI Act, right? It's a proposed law which will be the first by any regulator across the world on regulating the use of AI-based applications. The way we understand it, it classifies applications into three categories, right? Those with unacceptable risk, high-risk applications, and the ones that do not pose such high risks. Given what we know of PV and safety and the nature and the sensitivity of the area, I would assume that most PV applications would fall in the high risk or just below the high risk category. Jack, what does this mean for PV organizations?
Yes, so thank you, Nikesh, and I generally agree with you. I think the EU AI Act proposes certain requirements on high-risk systems which are currently being developed, so that it's all in flux as I see it. From a PV perspective now, a number of applications may potentially fall into this high risk category or just below it. However, there are also applications which could go into the lower risk category. Let me give you two examples to illustrate that. I think applying generative AI to the creation of case narratives from literature reports, we've just seen that very elegant example, that would most likely fall into the lower risk category from my perspective, because on the one hand, the data are anonymized in literature anyway, so we don't know the name or any specifics about that girl, for example, and also they only contribute a tiny slice to the characterization of the safety profiles of our medicines. Now, applying the approach to, for example, generating aggregate safety reports or benefit risk evaluation, and out of that risk management plans, on the other hand, to me seems to fall more into the medium to high risk category with potential direct implications for patient safety if things don't go as they should be. So if we agree that many of the applications in PV are medium or high risk, I think proper approaches to risk management are critical. And if we can switch to the next slide now, I think, thank you very much. This is actually a nice summary from the assessment list of trustworthy AI. And there are a number of bullets which I'd briefly like to skim through. The first one is on high quality training, validation, and testing. So this means that before we deploy generative AI in PV, we need to really have it properly tested with varied data inputs to produce reasonable, accurate outputs and documentation of the same. With regards to logging and traceability of the results, one of the questions I'd be interested in is how will we audit the outputs the tool is generating? From a transparency and information to users to use the system, I think we need to expect that, or we need to ask ourselves the question whether all the users are really trained to use these new PV systems. Can the PV specialist read and comprehend the outputs? And do they have all the information and the training and the experience needed to take decisions based on what they get through generative AI? Then on the human oversight, I think it's really important to ensure proper oversight and compliance from the get-go as soon as we use Gen AI applications. And this should, of course, then be supported and validated through audits and inspections. So quite a lot to be considered and done here, I think, in order to make this, if you will, bulletproof and not to undermine patient safety in the end.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Jack. I think that was very insightful. And given that, these requirements and different AI-based regulations are imminent, right? I know the EU AI Act is at a slightly higher level right now, but it won't be too far in the future where you will have subsections that deal with, many of these. I think PV organizations and service providers working with generative AI should be well aware and prepared to be compliant. Tarun, what should organizations do to stay ahead of these regulations, and what are we doing at Indigi?
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't found any, straightforward, centralized information source that covers all of these regulatory changes across the board. So what we're doing, and we've spoken to quite a few other organizations that are something similar. You kind of do have to keep a pulse on what's happening, especially we're talking about global perspective, right? If you're just looking at US, it's one thing, but when you're looking about these regulatory changes across the world in Europe and Asia, then it is worthwhile having someone, or at least spending some bandwidth checking the various news sources and checking in with the various partner organizations. We work closely with Amazon, with Google, with Microsoft, who have the global infrastructure and of course are running these tools. So they have services to help keep their customers more aware of some of the larger regulatory changes. But in our industry, when you start to zoom in a bit, then it's on us to kind of keep track of those. I have heard of some advisor organizations now trying to help and centralize and collate this information. So I think we'll see that get simplified, and perhaps you could just log into ChatGPT and ask it to go do it for you at some point soon once they have updated the training. So that certainly is one. And Jacques had made some excellent points around how you actually build this trustworthiness and these controls. Those are not unique to generative AI, right? This is something that machine learning, AI, any of these kinds of systems that start to look like these black boxes, we have to do these kinds of controls and measures. In machine learning, typically you train it with data. And when you have data, you separate out, you'll actually carve out part of that data as your golden records that's exclusively used for testing at the end. And the other part of it, the remaining piece of it, you use to help train and tune the system. And we have things such as F1 scores, and we have these kinds of metrics that we use to calculate confidence level and accuracy. So same thing with generative AI, we have to find the equivalence. It's not exactly the same as ML models because we're dealing with large pre-trained models, that the PT and GPTs is for that. But here, the ability to come up with metrics and heuristics and how you test the system and how you can actually determine confidence level, that's actually an important part of the trust and folds into that thing we talked about earlier about human in the loop. There are also technologies and approaches. We have heard of RLHF, which stands for reinforcement learning using human feedback. And so being able to take the output of these machines, going through the human subject matter experts, and then retraining the machine, there are methodologies and best practices for that. And yeah, here's seeing on the screen a great example that in a system, this is an example where we're taking unstructured content and creating the structured information. On the left-hand side, on the bottom, you can see a box in red. So here is the system that extracted some information from unstructured text, but the confidence level was at a low level. So the human reviewer, their eyes are drawn to this because the machine and our processes tell it that this is something that's likely going to need human review. And similarly, on the right-hand side, what we talked about earlier, the traceability. So we can actually go see that, well, why did the system say this person is Caucasian? So now on the right-hand side, we can go trace to see where does this data ultimately come from by traceability. So these kind of factors, having confidence levels, building that into your workflow, building that into your interface, and optimizing it for the human experience who are reviewing it, I think those go a long way towards solving this.
Okay, excellent. Tarun, I see the automated quality check to be a game changer, as well as having the as you mentioned, right, a human in the loop and using that information to reinforce essential. I would also like to get the opinion of the audience on cost and savings before we dive into the other topic of this particular webinar. Audience, you should see a poll flash on your screens again. Choose the option that you feel is most appropriate in terms of what is the expected savings that you would anticipate from generative AI. Now, while you're doing that, Jack, let me come to you. While quality and compliance are definitely key, it's important to weigh in the cost element and see if generative AI truly brings in business value, right? And higher the costs, lower the savings, obviously. How should sponsors and PV leaders go about calculating, the various elements of costs when working with generative AI?
Yeah, that's a great question, Nikesh. And thinking about it, I mean, there's no question there will be direct and indirect costs associated with generative AI. The question is, do the costs outweigh the benefits we get? If I look at the cost side of things, the direct costs are most likely associated and calculated per use case and application. The question is, how does that compare to the current model we're using to fulfill certain requirements and obligations in our PV systems? Then there are a lot of indirect costs I can think of. So we need to have IT infrastructure, IT colleagues helping us with deploying the tools. We need to change and modify some of our processes. Possibly the more we use generative AI, the more processes we need to adopt. Then we need to train our employees. We need to provide auditing and oversight of this new technology, particularly during the early days of Gen AI. And we talked about this earlier. And then there are, of course, cost of errors. So possibly not every approach we're taking via Gen AI will bear the results we're hoping for. At the same time, there should, of course, be savings, cost savings, and also other upsides. So saving headcount to deliver transactional work, this mundane repetitive work, could be a saving, and it could put us in a position where we can redeploy this headcount to other areas, enhancing the overall value add we provide to our internal and external stakeholders. Ideally, we should also see increases in consistency, quality, and compliance around many areas of our work. And that is, of course, something which is hard to quantify, but which is a huge add-on if generative AI would help us in that regard. The practical approach a pharma company might take is to go case by use case. So pick the first use case, do a few pilots, start with the easy wins, like the one brilliant example we've just seen, which are more on the low risk side, and then take it from there in a stepwise and risk adjusted approach, and try to find the right balance of what we're doing. And then we'll look at the cost, direct, indirect costs, but I'm sure that the upsides will outweigh the costs and the indirect endeavors we're undertaking to get this sorted.
Thank you, Jack. I think some very, very practical suggestions there. Something that pharma companies can sort of leverage. We have the results of the poll we just did, and more than half the audience expects generative AI to yield between 20 to 40%, with another 30% expecting it to be between 40 to 60%. So almost 80% expects it to generate meaningful savings to be able to take the risk of implementing generative AI. Tarun, every penny saved obviously adds to the business value and to the business case of implementing generative AI. What are some of the levers that one can use to optimize costs while implementing applications using generative AI? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, Jark had rightfully called out this indirect and direct costs, and certainly the indirect side, he's spot on. I mean, that reflects the expertise that comes from this domain. On the direct side, there are infrastructure costs. There are costs today, of course, associated with these models themselves. So if we kind of zoom in on just that one piece of it, it's fairly tactical, which is looking at how much does it cost me to actually use these generative AI models, right, at the infrastructure level. Today, most of these language models are priced at something called the token level, right? You pay a certain amount for 1,000 tokens or 1,000,000 tokens. And we are seeing a lot of noise in the system around the pricing. And as more and more models proliferate, we're seeing, hopefully we'll see more of it, but this pricing competitiveness and coming in. But nevertheless, the costs are up there. So the first step is choosing the right model. If you look at OpenAI, for example, GPT-3 versus GPT-4, you're talking like a 10x difference. That's pretty substantial. And similarly, the other models are priced in basically by use case. You may have seen the recent announcement from OpenAI that GPT-3 can now be fine-tuned. So if your use case is one where you're kind of a narrow use case, like in our case, we were looking at literature, specifically literature tied to safety. So that's not a general chatbot, right? That's something that's meant to solve a certain problem. So in that case, when you have a narrow use case, you can fine tune a model and that may be able to run that at a lower cost. So GPT-3 being fine tuned for a use case while more expensive than running GPT without the fine-tuning, is still, I think, 1/8 the price of GPT-4. And then there's also a proliferation of open source models that are coming out there. So there's Llama 2, Falcon, there's a wide variety of them. So we've seen some organizations actually choose to run an open source model on their own hardware, their own infrastructures, to avoid that transactional cost. There's also, of course, good data privacy benefits from that. But at the same time, those models are definitely not competitive with the GPT-4 or Claude or these big models out there. But if you fine tune them for a narrow use case, they actually will give you equal results. So if you're able to say, if you look at your overall business process and you say, I'm doing some process re-engineering, I'm going to solve for these particular choke points, and you narrow that down to, this is what I want generative AI to do, and this is only what I want it to do, then you can fine tune and reduce costs. So I think the first step is definitely choosing the right model, choosing the right deployment mechanism, seeing if you need to invest in fine-tuning a model for a narrow use case, which will give you longer-term cost benefits, or if you need to go with the large pre-trained models as is. That's where we want to start. And that's at least one tactical level we have on the technology side.
Yeah, and the other one, I think, as we can see, we could see on the screen, right, is the optimizing of prompts, etc. Right, Tarun?
Sorry, yeah, as I said, token cost is, so for example, I think on GPT-4 today, it's every 1,000 tokens is 6 cents, right? And a token is, you can think of a token as a word, the ratio is a little bit different than that. So the fewer the tokens, the lower the cost. So one thing we struggle with in our space is you want to give instructions to the AI, so that requires a lot of words. But you want to do fewer words at the same time reduce cost. So how do you give complete and precise enough instructions while minimizing the number of words or tokens that you're sending to the system? So that's what we call prompt engineering, right? That's a big part of prompt engineering, is constructing, articulating your prompts that go into these models and optimizing them from a token count in order to reduce cost. But you're absolutely right that the instructions you give to the system and how you use them can have a big influence in cost.
Great. Thank you. So I think, we've spoken about trust mechanisms, we've spoken about costs. We have about 10 odd minutes to go. So why don't we look at the audience Q&A, and we have a few questions that have come in. So let me start with the first one from Nimita. As per your assessment, what percentage of pharma is exploring the use of generative AI in PV, and what percentages have reached the POC stage? Maybe I can start with that, and then Tarun, Jack, you can add. We actually did a survey recently at Indegene where we polled about 100 PV leaders, and interestingly, only 12% said that they're not considering generative AI at all at this point of time. Almost a third, which is about 34%, said that they are less than 6 months away from implementing generative AI in their PV systems, right, in production. And about close to 50, the remaining 54% said that they are between 6 to 12 months. So the answer to your question is that it is something that most pharma companies are looking at across the board. In fact, from what we've heard, this is almost a boardroom level conversation as well. But Tarun, Jack, would you like to add any flavor to this?
I mean, I think that's spot on. That's been our experience as well. There hasn't been a conversation that we've had where generative AI isn't in some way, and some organizations are early. I wouldn't even call them POC yet. They're exploring. The first question you ask is, should I add generative AI into my system, right? So, but everyone is certainly examining that question, right? There's a fear of missing out. The FOMO is coming into there. So I completely agree with that survey. Actually, I'm curious about those 12 companies that have banded.
Yeah, I agree with Tarun. I think, speaking to colleagues, generative AI is top of mind for all of us. Like maybe outsourcing many years ago, where we thought we could, and we did actually reduce our cost base via outsourcing of transactional work. The beauty of Gen AI is that it not only provides potential cost savings, but also increases, as I alluded to, in compliance, consistency, etc., etc. So it's not only about the money, but it's also about being more solid in our approaches to PV overall. So therefore, I'd be surprised if in a few years' time, not everybody would be using it. I mean, there will be early starters and laggards as with every technology, but everybody will follow suit as soon as they've seen these use cases go live and add the value that we expect from them.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, a big part of the training is the data, right? Do you see federated learning platforms coming into play to train the algorithms? Tarun, maybe you can take this one. And how much of it is really, given that these are pre-trained models, how much of this is, an important aspect?
Yeah, and it's actually a very interesting question, because one of the big reasons generative AI is kind of going on this ride that it is because of the pre-trained aspect of it. There's already been a pre-existing investment in a massive amount of data used to train it. So a couple of things have come from it. One is, as we're using them more and more, as I mentioned, this idea of fine-tuning a model in order to solve your narrow use case. At the enterprise level, I think we'll see more of that. So enterprises are having to make decisions around their own data, right? Do you have the data infrastructure in place? So yeah, a kind of a precursor to even using generative AI at the enterprise level is actually, do you have a data mechanisms in-house in order to fine-tune these models for your use case? And then if you're going to implement the RLHF, the reinforcement learning with human feedback, is your system set up in order to capture that feedback and put that in the algorithm? So certainly being able to get the data from your own internal organization to fine tune and have your human loop system feedback, that is something I think a lot of organizations should be looking at, especially in the long run with generative AI. Secondly, the organizations that own the master training data. So how GPT is trained, how Bedrock, all these things are trained. We're going to see a lot more protectionism, if you will, or commercialization or monetization of those. So you've already seen examples of it today, where authors of textbooks are starting to file lawsuits against the big platforms that have, they believe have trained their models based upon that. So what's that mean for safety, right? So in safety, as organizations have a lot of proprietary information, there's also public domain information that's going to be used to train these large models, and then enterprises are going to fine tune these models. The enterprises may want to hold on to some of their proprietary data to give them an edge, right? That could happen. So I think there's a lot to be seen as the dust settles here, but having your data story in place and your data infrastructure in place and thinking about data sets for fine tuning, I think is certainly an important step.
Sure. Thank you. There's a question on maybe Jacques, you're probably better to take this one. What are your thoughts and experience with use of AI in signal prediction? So pharma companies can be working more proactively versus retroactively.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, and as we've seen in your beautiful example, if we start with the simple approaches like extracting data from literature sources, which of course serves as a basis of some of the signals we're looking at, that could be a good start. But I think it will not stop there. It may also move to looking at more aggregate data and combining the data from different sources, extracting anything that we would view as a signal and help us more readily and faster aggregate bigger data samples and make sense of the data that these bigger data aggregates hold from a signaling perspective.
Yeah.
But that's certainly an option. I for sure see that. And
Yeah.
it would move us away from the more manual approach, for example, we've been so far following, to a more, if you will, automated, more consistent approach, not to lose sight of anything we've just not captured manually. If we have a really nice, solid system powered by generative AI, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you, Jacques. Another question is for literature cases, right? Attribution is critical. right? In terms of whether, because in many literature you will have multiple products mentioned, and which product is actually, causing the adverse event is critical. Tarun, we've encountered this in the multiple experiments we've run. The question is generative AI capable to assess and attribute correctly?
I don't think there's a conclusive answer to that yet. What we have seen is that it can, in a human augmented process, it does yield benefit, right? I think just broadly speaking, that when we look at because there's a wide variety of literature, right? There's complex literature documents, there's simple ones, there are many multiple products or a single product, so there's a diversity of the incoming sources. So then the attribution of, for example, a diagnosis or a reaction in there to one of those, if there's multiple product mentions, we actually have seen generative AI reasonably good at identifying it, but I wouldn't trust it to be on 100% accuracy. It definitely needs human reviewers, but I think the net benefit is there. But like I said, it's classified as experimental at this point, or promising at this point, maybe is a better term.
And let me just come in there. I totally agree with Tarun, but even the most experienced human reviewer will sometimes not be able to tease out which medicine caused the adverse event, or is it a combination of the medicines the patients take. And so, I mean, even Gen AI, I think, will not help, or might not be able to help us with the most complex situations. The easier ones are we as humans can sort out, and Gen AI may help us to sort those out. But if you get to those patients with multiple diseases, lots of medications, very rare events, how to sort that out, I think will still be a complex problem.
No, I think
I
perfect.
suppose.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and that's what our experiments have always also shown, right? That you got to take a tiered approach. You can't throw everything in the manner. I think we have time for one last question, so I'm going to take one really interesting one. In fact, I've been waiting for this question to pop up. For PV use cases, isn't it better to look at LLMs in the clinical setting, like AWS Comprehend Medical? Though I'm not sure AWS Comprehend Medical is an LLM versus ChatGPT, but I think the broader question is that versus traditional, I'm calling it traditional AI models like Comprehend Medical, how do they compare, Tarun, with the newer LLMs or the pre-trained models that we've been discussing?
So I think one key point, and maybe it didn't come through clear enough earlier, is that all of these systems are ensembles of multiple tools. So you have LLMs, your generative AI is one component of it. NLP, whether through medical comprehend, there's another one. Traditional rule-based systems, those all are important tools that finally get united together to finally build a case processing or case intake system. So I don't see them as necessarily competitors for each other. Yeah, there's a few areas where they overlap, right? But end of the day, what our experience has been, actually rule-based systems are still king. I mean, it's hard to build any good, solid, validated system without just industrial strength rules within there. Then what you find is that once I have my rule-based system in place, now where do I still see some choke points in the system? Where can I augment the human process? And that's where AI models, machine learning models, and then even generative AI kicks in. So I don't see generative AI necessarily replacing, completely replacing rule-based systems or completely replacing natural language processing platforms, which are deep learning specialized in there. But I can see that the combination of all of those together yields the business ROI that we're looking for.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much to the audience for asking some great questions. Thank you so much, Jack and Tarun, for joining us today. I hope that this session was useful to all of you who joined. Yes, you see one final poll that's giving us feedback on what it whether it was informative or not. And look forward to more engagement in further webinars that we might hold. So thank you so much, everyone, and I hope you all have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.